Remember that. Good evening. Good evening, everyone. It feels kind of like candlelight or something here. I'm not sure, but the lighting seems a little different here. It's not candlelight. But since 5:45 this evening, this Board of Education has been in closed session for purposes of appointment, employment, compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of specific employees of the district or legal counsel for the district, collective negotiating matters concerning the district and its employees or the representatives, litigation when an action against, affecting, or on behalf of a particular district has been filed or is pending before a court or administrative tribunal, and student disciplinary cases. And I will entertain a motion to come out of closed session.
So moved. Second.
Motion and second. All in favor? Thank you very much, and thank you everyone for coming, whether you're here in person or on the World Wide Web. And I'd like to just restate our mission, the district's mission, to educate students to be self-directed learners, collaborative workers, complex thinkers, quality producers, and community contributors. And with that, I will ask our board secretary for a roll call.
Sure. Board members present: Donna Wanke, Susan Price, Terry Fielden, Jackie Romberg, Susan Crotty, Kristen Fitzgerald, and Mike Yench.
And I'd like you to stand as you're able for the pledge. Thank you all. And we have some good news.
I have one quick good news comment to recognize and thank a group that's not here to hear it. Hopefully they're watching. But often goes unnoticed and unthanked, our district grounds and maintenance crews for their tireless work over the last couple of days, getting our parking lots and sidewalks clear and ready for our kids and staff tomorrow. That's right. We will have school tomorrow. Kids will be back in tomorrow. So great
That's
work.
Good news,
That's great
news.
That's great news. So great work by Steve Mathis and his department on really getting out there and getting after multiple times our parking lots, our roadways, and our sidewalks. So thank you to them, and thank you to the city of Naperville for fantastic communication with the two school districts overnight and early today regarding the state of roads throughout the city to help us in our decision making. So thank you for the great communication. Good news.
Thank you. And this is our public comment time of the evening, and I'll just refresh everyone's, I don't know that anybody has asked or filled out a slip that exists outside about speaking to the board. If you're speaking as an individual in public comment, you have 3 minutes, or you're representing a group, it's 5 minutes. So with that, we will move on. Our student ambassadors are not here. They did not have school today. I'm sure they're studying. And with that, we'll go to the superintendent's staff school report.
We have 3 reports this evening, and I'm going to invite our crew from Meadow Glens to come forward to the presentation table. I can see that we were actually proactive this time and have 3 chairs there, so come on up forward. But monthly, we have invited one of our schools to share with the Board of Education an update on the school progress toward improvement, sharing tasks and activities within their school improvement plans. And tonight, it is my pleasure to welcome Meadow Glens to the board meeting, and I'll turn it over to Principal Katie Lynch to begin the presentation.
One microphone, but 3 chairs. Yes. They have to share.
We're good.
They have to share. They look like they can share.
Good evening, and thank you for inviting Meadow Glens to share our school improvement plan. It takes a team to implement change, and both Beth Canny and Deb Mitchler have stepped up to help lead the change process at Meadow Glens. At Meadow Glens, our school improvement team is built on an environment of trust that focuses on preparing all students for success. The people listed on this slide have worked tirelessly in developing and implementing our school improvement plan. This summer, our team came together to synchronize our school improvement efforts with the district's strategic focus, the system of practice, and the laws of school improvement and Meadow Glens School Improvement Plan. We asked our team to brainstorm everything that was on their plates in the coming school year and work to align the district commitments with our school improvement priorities, goals, and tasks. Our school improvement team worked together to thoughtfully interconnect the separate components supporting student learning into these 3 goals. This is our second year of working on the first 2 goals and our first year with Goal 3. When Goal 1 is fully met, decision-making groups at Meadow Glens will synchronize success synchronize the use of data to inform decisions about school improvement and professional development needs. When Goal 2 is fully met, teachers will have a deep understanding of designing differentiated activities aligned to the Common Core standards, standard-based learning targets, and criteria for mastery. Our third goal connects some of the same components as Goals 1 and 2, and when fully met, teachers will use the Common Core state standards, district maps, and formative and summative assessment to differentiate assignments that respond to student needs.
At Meadow Glens, we are synchronizing success through the use of student data. You will see that data is a theme throughout our presentation. This is our second year focusing on this objective as the leadership team has worked to clarify how each decision-making group can use data to impact student learning. Our slide illustrates that our building leadership team is at the core of our groups, studying universal data to identify school or grade level-wide trends. Professional learning communities, co-teaching partnerships, child service, and problem-solving teams look at data by grade levels, classrooms, and individual student progress in order to determine how instruction can be personalized to meet student needs. This audio clip of Susan McLean, a 4th grade teacher at Meadow Glens, illustrates how their grade level PLC's use of data is positively impacting student learning.
One of the things that we're really spending our PLC time on is writing, and it's something that as a 4th grade team who's worked together for many years, we've never really looked at in depth student writing before. We've come together with the new writing program, the writing rubrics. We've had to interpret them, make sure that we all have the same understanding so that we are rating all the student papers. We are on the same page. We've looked at a lot of student work together, scored it together to make sure we have that inter-rater reliability. Then we've also looked at the papers to see what is it that our students' needs are in the future, and to make sure that we will be incorporating those into our lesson plans.
This slide brings the use of data to synchronize student success to life. You will see the fall and winter performance series scores for 2 students who have problem-solving plans. While decision-making groups do not use one single data point to determine success, for the purpose of this presentation, we will focus on the improvement each of these students have shown on this particular test. The student on the left has a problem-solving plan that supports reading growth by providing additional instruction in the area of reading comprehension, and she has shown growth by moving from the 30th national percentile ranking in the fall to the 58th national percentile ranking with her winter reading scores. The student on the right has a problem-solving plan that provides for additional time for this student to review and retain basic math facts and reteaching of core instruction in order to solve more complex math problems with greater speed and accuracy. You can see that she has moved from the 7th national percentile ranking to the 23rd in the winter.
And collaboration is another way we synchronize our success at Meadow Glens. Beth spoke about teacher teams collaborating in their use of data, and it is seen throughout our school. Although with this slide, we'd like to emphasize how collaboration is helping to meet Goal 2, which you see there in the blue circle about units of instruction. The colored squares are 3 of the 7 tasks in this goal. We'd like to highlight these 3 because using collaboration helps us achieve those tasks. When it comes to working together, one change at Meadow Glens is the work that is happening in our professional learning communities. In the picture on the left, our 3rd grade PLC is looking at a rubric provided in the curriculum map for the ELA units. They are looking at student work to determine where students are in their mastery of the ELA standards. Along the way, they see student misconceptions and talk about next steps for instruction. All of our PLCs do similar work. Another change in the way we collaborate at Meadow Glens is through the use of co-teaching. Some of our regular education teachers partner with an LBS teacher, the ELL teacher, a reading specialist, instructional assistants, or me, the learning support coach. As these partnerships plan units of instruction, they engage in all three tasks on a daily basis. In the photo on the right, Megan Mason, a 5th grade teacher, is working with Carrie Churchill, our speech and language teacher, in writing. In the audio clip, they talk about how co-teaching impacts student learning and their instruction.
I believe one of the biggest benefits is that we are able to provide immediate and consistent feedback on a more regular basis with the students, and it has reduced the student-teacher ratio.
And it's also really helpful to have two teachers grading and looking at student work so that we can put our minds together and come up with where are the gaps in student learning, where do we need to supplement some more information and come up with more efficient ways of teaching them, and having someone to talk that through with and come up with creative ideas is really helpful.
Being the speech pathologist in the building, I have different perspectives since I am able to work with kids through all the grade levels, and I can see the writing curriculum and how it's evolved to this point.
At Meadow Glens, one way we synchronize success through differentiation is to effectively utilize all personnel to maximize student learning. In this video, you will see the classroom teacher, reading specialist, and the instructional assistant all working with the 1st grade class to support the range of learners in this classroom.
There's tall guys that have 2 eyes and short guys that have 1 eye, and guys that have like short guys that have 2 eyes. You have to write your second job is going to be to write the name of the person we've studied this week on the line. So who is our book about? Martin Luther King. Yes, so we're going to write Martin Luther King Jr. on that line about who this story was about. Kind. Nice. So put your
Teachers also utilize the curriculum maps, progressions, rubrics, student work, and other resources to plan for differentiation.
Look at the curriculum map to see each unit's specific goals and the different lessons that we'll cover. A lot of the things that I have here are from our nonfiction unit. So I will look at the curriculum map for my regular classroom instruction. I consider the reading room extra for all. So we'll try to make those classroom goals more applicable to each kid's individual level in the reading room. So for example, our nonfiction unit, some of the kids who had not yet met the curriculum target might be working on things like breaking down words or finding bold words in text, whereas my students who had already met the curriculum target were able to create these nonfiction books here. These have pages and pages of work with glossaries and indexes and bold words, and those kids were able to apply those skills in this piece. So it's the same target for the students. I'm just bringing it to all levels. Naturally, the goal is, for everyone to meet the same curriculum targets. These groupings just allow us to meet those needs.
In just a little over 3 months, with our 1st grade teachers implementing the new reading curriculum, and the reading specialist, classroom teacher, and instructional assistant providing small group intervention for all students, our 1st grade students have gone from just 48% meeting or exceeding the grade level expectations on the F&P assessment in the fall to 83% meeting or exceeding grade level expectations on the Fontes and Pinnell assessment in the winter. At Meadow Glens, we are responding to the changing landscape by embracing the new standards, assessments, curriculum, and increased opportunities with technology to prepare all of our students for success. Through our work, we continue to define and refine what it looks like when students meet the Common Core state standards and when teachers maximize learning opportunities for all of our students. And at this time, we'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
A question. Thank you for your presentation. And my question's in reference to the video that you presented. Is that can you give us a little more background as to what kind of that's not a even the arrangement's not a typical classroom. So can you give us a little bit more about the video?
Yeah, it's actually not a classroom. We have taken our reading specialists and really utilized them to support, like we said, to differentiate using our human resources and also our curriculum and other materials for our students. So the reading specialists, we have 2 of them at Meadow Glens, our instructional assistant and the classroom teacher meet to plan for the students in that classroom. So with our instructional assistant, we have 3 first grade classrooms that she supports, and then we have our instructional assistant in kindergarten, and we have 2 classrooms there. So our reading specialists are working with those small groups alongside with the classroom teacher and the instructional assistant for 30 minutes every day. We take the 5th day for them to plan together, so to really look at where the students are, how they have done throughout the week, kind of regroup if need be based on where the students are. At about the end of a 2-week cycle, we review all of the data that we have on the students, and we look at where they're at and whether those groups should stay together or whether they should be flexible and maybe move some of the students to a different group based on the skills that they're working on and based on their level of proficiency. So we really take the Fontes and Pinnell test from the beginning of the year to start our grouping with them, and then we just take assessments, running records, and just looking at student work and how they're progressing in the group based on the skills that that particular group is working on. So it gives us that small guided instruction in a small group every single day. So thank you. You're welcome.
Thanks for all your great review of the different kinds of things you're putting into place to support your kids. Your data looks great for your Fontes and Pinnell, and I just wondered how that compares to your data from the previous year. So you've got the new, the different supports that you're putting in now. How does that compare?
It's a little bit like comparing apples and oranges because what we are, not totally, but we are using what our expectations have risen this year, increased for the different grade levels. And so the difference is very different for a starting first grader than what it was last year. So when we're looking at that, it increases, in the fall, it also increases in the winter, and it increases in the spring. So as we're looking at it, I don't know if you could really say that compared to last year, here's where we're at, because we're really measuring something different. We've increased that rigor. We've increased our expectations for our students. And so I think I would say that we are continuing to make progress with those students. Whether I can say it's accelerated, I think we need to wait for another year with the same standards and the same expectations for students before we can say whether we really feel like this is making a difference. But I would say the classroom teachers are seeing extreme growth in some of our neediest students, but they are also seeing that same level of growth with some of our students that are way above grade level expectations. So our goal was to kind of intervene for all, not just intervene for our students that weren't making those grade level expectations, but to really support all students where they are in meeting those expectations. So that this gives us an avenue to do that.
My second question is, you seem to have been working very hard to put into place the differentiation in your classroom. How do you communicate about that to parents? Because I know that sometimes parents have questions about how that actually works. Have you found certain measures to be particularly successful in communicating those kinds of different groupings and different types of activities in order to meet their child's needs?
I know at Meadow Glens that our parents like communication from all angles. So it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all for them. So we really addressed all of that last year coming into this and really talking to our parents about how that was going to change through some of my newsletters. The classroom teachers do a great job through their newsletters, but also through their curriculum night. And then we have really talked to parents and brought them in because they also read with students in the classroom in both kindergarten and first grade. So as those parents come in, sharing with them what this looks like, sharing with them, it's very visual when you're in there, has given them an insight into what structure we put in place this year. And so we've had probably less questions about it than we've ever had, because really seeing it makes it come alive for those parents rather than just hearing about it. So I think just continue to communicate, and I think our parents are really happy to see that all of the students are getting so much individual small group attention. So it's been a real win-win for us.
Great. Thank you.
Katie, I have a question for you, and it's more as an overarching question for so many of the presentations we've seen. You just happen to be sitting in front of me, so this is not specifically directed at you or your school or anything, but I'm just curious. You mentioned, collaboration and synchronicity and all these different things, and to get there, everyone has to be on board. And I know that this is a big shift for a lot of staff. That it can be new staff, it can be staff that's been there a long time. So you introduce kind of all these new ideas and ways of doing things. How do you get everybody on board? Because some people are a little shyer to get on board than others.
Well, I'm going to tell you, this is just my personal way of doing it. I don't know if I can speak for all of the principals, but I feel like you have your superstars in your school, and you really need to communicate and build that trust with them. If those superstars go out and start talking about that, and I don't want to say buy-in, I want to say ownership, and we talk about that. I don't want you to just buy in. I want you to own this process. I want you to own the students in the classroom, and I want you to own our school improvement plan. So if you're working with those few leaders that you have, and those are the people that we've pulled into our PLC leadership team, to really go out and kind of spread the word, and to really, try and show them that by doing this process, we are getting good results. I think when you get good results by doing something different, or by maybe embracing something that seems a little bit different to you and kind of scary, people want to know then. They come to those people and say, I want a piece of this. Show me how to do that. And so I think working with your staff and those superstar staff that you have, and really empowering them to be the leaders in the school, not just me, my work is much easier.
Okay.
And
you
so
have a whole army marching for you then.
I have the army marching for me. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to bring my team with me, is because at Meadow Glens, we truly work as a team. It doesn't work to just be the person standing up at the front talking to your classroom or to your staff. You really have to build that trusting relationship and try and kind of build that support system for all.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It certainly was not just at you. It just was an idea that, thought that came to me. So when you take the scores that the students have, the gains that you've seen, how do you follow that next year, like for their next kind of, their cohort group or whatever? How do you continue to follow that so that that they're not starting over again next year?
Well, I think the district has done a really nice job in layering in balanced assessment for us. And so really some of that like assessment that we can use to see that growth, and then really using the benchmarks for those students to see if we are closing the gap on those students that were maybe not meeting grade level expectations in the past. Are our interventions working? Are what we're doing closing the gap for those students? And so really looking at that rate of growth for the students, but then also in the larger picture to see that those meets are now moving to exceeds instead of staying at meets. So really looking to expand that growth. And through the benchmarks and the assessments that are common for all of us, I think that will really give us the avenue to carry that forward.
Boy, you guys must just cheer at your meetings when you meet and you see the strides some of your students are making.
You know what? I think we are blessed, truly, because we have great staff, we have great leadership right now, and we have wonderful parents and students. it takes all of us to truly make that that happen. So I can't certainly take that all on my own. You know, our parents bring their kids ready to learn at Meadow Glens, and we are blessed that we have parents that are invested in their child's education, and that the students are as invested as their parents. So, yeah.
Thank you for coming out tonight.
You're
I know
very
it was a
welcome.
quiet day, so thank you so much.
So your improvement, certainly commendable, but I have a curiosity question. You talked about your writing in fourth grade and so forth, how that became a better focus and more of taking the papers all together, looking at where the weaknesses are, and deciding to make it more collaborative from a teacher standpoint to focus what the students' needs are. So how did you arrive at the point where writing in the fourth grade became like a critical element to you that you wanted to look at that?
Well, we have a new writing curriculum this year, and I think that for our teachers, this was the first time that they really had a succinct rubric to work from. Also, my fourth grade team is piloting one of the growth measures this year, and when we got together, we talked about possibly using writing, since this was new curriculum and they were going to really be diving into it anyways, to see that growth piece. And so working in tandem with the learning support coach and myself, really trying to figure out where our kids are, where they started from, and what does that look like when we say they have mastered that, or when they have, approached that grade level expectation. It's not a simple checklist. It's really, so what are we going to accept for mastery? So the only way that we could have truly made this curriculum come alive is to have those deep conversations about student work and really have that inter-rater reliability, so that if Beth is looking at a piece of writing, that I see the same thing that she's looking at when we're looking at the rubric, and Deb does too. And so I think that's given us the avenue to really collaborate around something that in the past was a bit undefined. Now we have a much more defined standards, the Common Core standards, then also our curriculum that is aligned with the Common Core that have really given us that opportunity to do that.
So do you think the students will get a deeper understanding of how to write and how to structure papers and so forth? Because writing has a pretty, denotes a lot of things for intelligence, but also for communication. So that's, and 90% of what I do for a living is
Right.
writing. That's why it's a curiosity.
I think our goal is to just make it as transparent to the students as possible about what it is that they need to do in order to meet or exceed those grade level expectations. So when we have conversations and we're conferring with the students, we're not only looking at the rubric and saying, you missed this, but we're looking at the rubric and saying, this is what this piece needs to look like in order for you to meet this expectation. And so to collect those examples and exemplars and really use those to show students what that writing should look like if they want to meet or exceed those grade level expectations. So that is our hope, is that it is as transparent for the teachers that are trying to do it as it is for our students, yeah.
Any other comments or questions? I just had a couple of a comment and a question. Katie, I've had the opportunity to be at your school as a board liaison, and I appreciate what you're saying. Just seems contagious to me in the most positive way. But you've really gotten to know your community, really worked with your parents. So I understand that you say they all come ready to learn, but I've seen differently. So thank you so much for all you've done. And as I've said, I see this. It's contagious. Your excitement and your leadership goes out to your fellow leaders here and then to the rest of the building. So it's wonderful. And after saying that, I don't want to put you on the spot, but one of our reports tonight is the instructional assistants. Mm-hmm. And I know you've mentioned, we saw in the video, and you've talked about them a couple of times, what they do and how they support learning in the classrooms. But I'd like the three of you to weigh in or think about if you have any thoughts on the different role that the instructional assistants are playing now versus a couple of years ago.
How about we all three talk about it? So
I'd
I'll
love
go to
that.
Deb first. Go ahead.
And you're asking about how the role
No-
has maybe
no
changed?
prep time for this. Well,
the
the role
has
has changed,
changed
right?
over
Or-
the last couple of years.
Yes.
I see in grades 1, 2, I see the instructional assistant as part of the planning process. They're sitting with classroom teachers to look at evidence of student learning and saying, okay, what are next steps? And so I feel like the instructional assistant is becoming more of a partner in that. A lot of benefit to that. Our grades 3 through 5 assistant, she's only there 3 hours, so it's a little bit trickier to include her because we want her time with students in small groups. I know, Beth, you also work with some of the instructional assistants.
I do. As the facilitator of our building's problem-solving team, oftentimes we're going to our instructional assistants when we are bringing a student up and we see that there's a gap in achievement from where the student is performing now and what the expectations are for that child. Oftentimes we're structuring an intervention. We're giving very specific guidelines about what materials we want used and how frequently we want that child to have time with an instructional assistant, and we're using that staff to help support those learners too. So in those small group settings and sometimes in a one-on-one setting too.
Can I add one more thing I just thought of? In second grade, their PLC recently was looking at some word study data, and they determined that perhaps the on-grade level students who are right where we want them to be, maybe they would be with the instructional assistant for a while one of our classroom teachers would work with students who need a little bit more support. And often we hear that the instructional assistant might be working with someone who needs more support, but in this way they're turning it around a little differently to see how that might play out.
And the lady in the middle?
Well, I would say by design, we really want that instructional assistant to work with all of our students. And so we have kind of built that in, not only in our reading room, but also in the classroom. So when we look at our classroom instruction, we're looking at grade levels rather than just classrooms. So we're looking at the data of all of the students in that grade level, and we're really looking at what the standards are, where some of our gaps might be, or where are some of our kids that are already exceeding those standards, and what that instruction for them might look like. And then really using all of our human resources and other resources to support the needs of those students. So that instructional assistant might be working with a group of kids that is working above grade level expectations or has already exceeded those grade level expectations. And they might also be working with a student or a small group of students that maybe need some extra to meet the grade level expectations, or as Deb said, might be working with that group that's right on grade level expectations. So our instructional assistant is very much a part of instruction. There is not really a moment in her day where she is not with students doing some kind of instruction or supporting instruction in some way. So I would say that's a huge difference for how we're using them.
Oh, okay.
You know, in the past, and I'm just going to say this because it's one model that we used with instructions was LEAP. They worked with one student, and they did some great things with that student, but it was one student, and we have many students. And so I feel like we are touching so many more students with the way that we have put our instructional assistants in place for kindergarten and first grade and second grade and even third grade. We're really able to reach out and make a difference for all of our students. And I like to think of it as intervention for all rather than just for our students who are not meeting grade level expectations.
I so appreciate, I'm sure my colleagues do appreciate this perspective, because it's great to hear from the administrators what they're hearing is happening, but I couldn't resist because you were here and brought some of your staff with you just to get your perspective, and I didn't mean to surprise you with that question, but thank you so much. You gave real life examples, and that's really helpful to me. Was there another question?
I just have, thank you. You had spoke to the 3rd to 5th grade instructional assistant and said that was a little bit different, and I understand how it's different as well, but how is that working in the building and meeting not just, and I heard you say too that we're trying to meet the needs of all students, but in particular in 3 through 5, how is it working meeting the needs of the students who are, at the level where they need support to come up, and the students who are at the level that they need to be challenged more, like at 3 through 5, how's that working?
Well, you know that that 3-hour assistant is for 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. But I would say 4th and 5th grade really do get some different kind of support that 3rd grade does not get for English language arts, right? What we would consider PI. So the main focus is to really give that extra support for our 3rd graders at that level and make sure that we're supporting those kids that might be above or below grade level expectations and also on grade level expectations. So I would say our primary focus is for those 3rd graders and really focusing in on that. But we have groups that are in 5th grade that for one reason or another, they are struggling with something in meeting grade level expectations. And we've tried to put those groups of kids together to try and close that gap for them. So I would say, I hope I'm answering your question, but I would say we're really trying to respond to student needs. And we're trying to respond to the other types of support that we have in place. So if we know we have some kind of support already in place and we have students that need something in another grade level, that's where our first priority is. We're really putting that into our 3rd grade English language arts and then trying to fill in with some other support in 4th and 5th grade where needed. Does that answer your question? Okay. Do you guys have
any other comments or questions? No, I mean, when this was presented to us, the instructional support person, it was going to be an interactive part of learning, and that's exactly what you've told us is happening. So thank you so much, and thank you for your presentation. It was very informative. Thanks so much.
Great work and a great transition to the next presentation. So as one group moves up, the next group of 3 will move to the presentation table. But as just was referenced at the conclusion of that last meeting, or that last presentation, we are going to provide the Board of Education an update on the instructional support that we're providing at the elementary level. And to do that presentation, we have our Chief Academic Officer, Jen Hester, Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum Instruction, Jane Willard, and our Assistant Superintendent for Elementary Education, who's thanking her team for presenting, Kitty Ryan. So I'll turn it over to Jen. I believe she's going to begin. I was stretching as long as I could.
All right, so thank you for that introduction. And I think we all have to say thank you to Meadow Glens for teeing us up very well for this evening. Last spring, the board approved a new model for instructional support for grades K through 2. And then I think probably as everyone recalls, the conversations that we had over that time led us to providing support also for grades 3 through 5. So the purpose of our presentation this evening is to provide an update on our instructional support model for elementary. I'll begin by providing a review of how the instructional support model is embedded in the school improvement process with a special focus on collaboration to respond to all students. And then I'll share the common design features that are prevalent in all of our elementary schools for instructional support. Mrs. Ryan will then provide an update on our school's progress with implementing professional learning communities, and then Mrs. Willard will provide an update on the professional learning for all staff in this model. We'll conclude our presentation by talking about the successes that our principals and schools are reporting in the model, and then also some of the opportunities for growth. So this is a slide that the board has seen very often, and you just saw some components of this slide in the Meadow Glens presentation. The elementary instructional support model is embedded within our system of practice, and it aligns with the laws of school improvement. In our system of practice, students are at the center, and that's consistent with our vision. The students are surrounded by teachers and other staff members who are providing culturally responsive practices and the support and the collaboration of all adults in the building. In our system of practice, the collaboration happens both formally through our PLC structure and other formal planning structures, and it happens informally as teachers, specialists, and assistants work together. The goal of our system of practice is to provide all students with access to rigorous core curriculum, to high-quality instruction. It's to provide everyone with a balanced assessment system, to implement multi-level system of support, which our instructional support model is one of those systems of support, and to provide our students with the best teachers. On the right-hand side of the screen are the laws of school improvement that we learned in our work with Dr. Joseph Murphy. The elementary instructional support model is flexible in that each school shapes student interventions and supports to meet the needs of their population. It's important to remember that the model is part of an array of efforts. It's not just one singular effort to improve student achievement. And the model is based on providing interventions for students when they don't meet standards, when they're meeting standards, and also when they're exceeding the standards. If you were to review the Rising Star indicators for our elementary school improvement plans, which I know you have, for the last 2 years, you would see that our school improvement plans not only support our system of practice, but they also have guided us in developing and implementing the elementary instructional support model. If we take a look at the model and a deeper look at the model and how it exists today across all of our elementary schools, I'm going to speak first to the support model in grades K through 2. All of our instructional support services in our elementary schools are aligned with guiding principles. You can think of these guiding principles as agreements among the schools and the districts. They're really our commitment of our beliefs and values and how we're going to implement the model. The 3 major categories for the guiding principles are on the screen. In board docs, you have a document that really provides the specific principles under each one of those categories. In the course of several meetings, actually I'm going to go back for a minute here. In the course of several meetings, we met with our elementary principals to unpack each of those guiding principles, and then think about how to put them into tangible actions. The principals, in turn, did the same with their staff so that everybody was familiar with the guiding principles. We also reviewed common design features for the instructional support model with our principals. I've highlighted 6 of the features of common design on the screen. The common design features are elements that each school's instructional support model must contain. The elementary principals worked as a team to understand each element and then worked with their building level teams to plan the implementation. The design features ensure that schools use Rising Star indicators to drive instruction and support for students. The primary goal of instruction is for all students to access and achieve the core curriculum. That means that we want the full range of curricular resources and instructional methodologies to be used, and that we want students to have support when they struggle to meet curriculum expectations or when they exceed those curriculum expectations. And that's really a key feature of our instructional support that we've not had before. I think Mrs. Lynch and her team really highlighted that you really think of intervention not only as something for kids who struggle, but you think of providing a line of support for everyone to help them deepen and extend their experience. Although our professional learning communities are a structure, it's the process in the professional learning community that actually leads to differentiated instruction. Our professional learning communities start from learning expectations in the core curriculum. Then they use data from multiple sources and assessments to determine where students are performing and the instruction is needed. Our teams then use culturally responsive practices to respond to students' culture, their learning styles, and their individual needs. The roles of the adults also had to be clarified in our common design features. The principals worked as a team to clearly define the role of all adults in providing instructional support. One of the clear distinctions between our certified classroom teachers and our instructional assistants is that our certified classroom teachers, which includes specialists, our learning behavior specialists, and other teachers, is that they are responsible for the instructional planning. whereas our assistants are responsible for deepening knowledge or building knowledge before the key learning happens, or providing extension or practice after that key learning. So Meadow Glens did a beautiful job this evening of showing us how they are using the guiding principles and what their instructional design looks like. I'd like to provide just some quick examples from Napier Elementary, because it's a 2-section building with some differences in the school community and then also in the student population. So if I go back and look at Napier's Rising Star indicators, their first Rising Star indicator and goal is focused around high expectations for all students. Their second one is to use assessment to differentiate learning. And their third one is to employ instructional teams or your professional learning community to review data and to assess students. In that goal, they look at their curriculum maps, they determine their instructional strategies, and they use culturally responsive practices. So it's very similar to Meadow Glens, but then let's take a look at this picture on the screen in the lower right-hand corner. This is a kindergarten classroom at Napier Elementary. It looks very much like the reading room that you saw Meadow Glen share earlier. This instruction is actually happening in the kindergarten classroom. You see the students in the front of the room who they have headphones on, but they are working independently. You see actually 2 instructional assistants in that picture providing some of that extra support that we've been talking about. And then what you don't see in the picture is there's a classroom teacher in there as well. So even though the school is different and the structure is different, they're able to provide that guided support. But also, like Meadow Glens, they will provide instruction where you see just the classroom teacher working with the students as well. So then I'm going to go back to our slide again on the common design features. The picture, the circle on the top of the screen, is actually a picture of the LRC director and the teacher in a 2nd grade classroom collaborating and working together to provide instruction for students. And then I think one of the key features that you'll find with Napier, one thing is they're moving between 2 classrooms. Instead of working with 3 classrooms in a reading room. But you'll also see in the collaboration, there are a lot more informal opportunities for collaborating because of the small size of the school. And in this last picture, you see the instructional assistant and a 3rd grade. It's the grades 3 through 5 instructional assistant collaborating with the classroom teacher. So that'll give you some examples there. So if we shift in talking about grades 3 to 5 and how that instructional support happens, I think the biggest message that we want to share this evening is that it's the same principles and the same common design features. And another thing that's the same is that you have multiple teachers collaborating to provide students with support. One of the key differences is that we have 1 assistant serving those 3 grades. And then as Mrs. Lynch shared, what most of our principals are telling us is that they are using data to really focus where that instructional assistant provides their support, and that the instructional assistant provides support both for kids who might struggle and then for kids who are achieving at higher levels. So that's an overview of the principles and the common design across all buildings. And Mrs. Ryan is going to move on to the professional learning community implementation and that role in our model.
Thank you. Whoops, let me make sure I get this so I can be heard. Thanks, Dr. Hester. Well, you know, professional learning communities are foundational to our whole plan, and especially important for the targeted support teachers provide to students who are struggling, meeting learning targets, or ready to move faster or deeper into content. PLCs structure teacher-team conversations so that there is a recursive cycle of data review, instructional planning, and assessment. To ensure that schools have the resources to adapt strong PLC structures and use them effectively, leadership teams receive ongoing training and support. Some schools participated in the initial training, and others are in initial stages now, as the chart above indicates. but all school teams are growing in their skill with PLCs and are using data to make instructional decisions and plan support specific to the needs of students. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Jane Willard.
This is the first year of full implementation of the literacy curriculum at the elementary level. As the table outlines, professional learning was planned to prepare teachers for the rigor of the new curriculum, the instructional shifts associated with the Common Core, and best practice in literacy instruction. Our teachers began their learning during the 2013-14 school year, beginning at the building level and then through district-led institute days. This past summer, all teachers extended their learning by participating in 3 full days of professional learning with the focus specifically on best practices in reading workshop, writing, word study, and instructional planning aligned to the new curriculum. This year, teachers continued to meet during institute days and in building-based teams to gain a deeper understanding of the new curriculum, the assessments, and also the resources. Additionally, teachers engage in professional learning and conversations around math on their own and also in their grade level teams. The instructional assistants often attend building-based PLCs and team meetings and also engage in the learning of math and literacy as part of those grade level teams. This year, Learning Services also planned professional learning specifically for those instructional assistants that align to the new curriculum with a focus on small group support and enrichment. This learning is targeted to build the capacity of assistants in working with students at all academic levels. We kicked off the year by bringing all instructional assistants together with these 2 outcomes in mind. First, gain a shared understanding of their new role. Second, to understand the curriculum and resources and how to support differentiation within the classroom. Differentiation occurs when the teacher uses data to plan instruction in a way that allows for students to be flexible to access content and skills in multiple ways and shows evidence of the learning that has taken place. Differentiation is a classroom practice that requires teachers to have a deep understanding of a student's learning profile in order to support and extend learning for all students. Word study is an area where many teachers access the instructional assistants to provide differentiated small group instruction. Teachers plan targeted instruction for all students, first based off the Words Their Way spelling inventory. Then the instructional assistant will work with small groups of students to support and increase their word knowledge, utilizing differentiated strategies and activities. They are focused on reinforcing skills and moving students along the continuum based on those individual needs. Professional learning in differentiation was designed to align to many of our schools' Rising Star plans. Instructional assistants have spent equal time building their knowledge in literacy as they have in the math curriculum and instruction. In addition to the professional learning they are receiving as a group, they also have the support of their grade level teachers and learning support coaches who they have planned learning at their building based and then also in their school improvement plans and individual needs.
Okay, and now to go over some of the successes. So our elementary principals provided us with a great list of successes and opportunities for growth. One of the first ones that they commented on was that the curriculum, so the new curriculum in literacy and our relatively new curriculum in math, our professional learning communities and the assessments within the curriculum are really allowing our teachers to be flexible and responsive to our students' needs. They also reported that the model is flexible and responsive to the building culture and priorities. So I think you can see if you look through the Rising Star indicators, if you were to go to the different buildings, you'll see a lot of commonalities, but you'll also see where they've been able to mold the model to meet their students' needs. The model is providing the opportunity for increased small group instruction, but it's also in the core, but it's also providing opportunities to target instruction to support all learners. So we're not just focused on supporting one-on-one anymore, and we're not just focused on supporting students who struggle. and we're providing more support at all levels. Also, one of the successes is the use of common assessment data to inform instructional planning. So in both cases, with literacy and math, our curriculums have common assessments, but then we also have the opportunities through the professional learning community structure for them to plan assessments together. Mrs. Willard already talked about the high quality professional learning for both our teachers and for our assistants. And lastly, whereas before we primarily supported literacy and then sometimes math, we're able to support literacy and math using both teachers and assistants, but then we're also able to extend into other core areas, and we haven't really been able to do that in the past. So moving into opportunities for growth, one of the first ones is that we're still implementing our professional learning community structure. It is one of the ways that is the avenue for differentiation for us, so we're continuing to build capacity for that. The next one is to ensure that our students have multiple opportunities to become independent. So we all know that if we want to learn, the true test of that is being independent. So we have to make sure that our students actually have the opportunity to work on their own versus always having an adult by their side. So that leads into our next opportunity for growth, and that is that we need to give our students a chance to experience disequilibrium. So learning comes with a little bit of struggle, sometimes some confusion, and definitely with persistence. So we need to make sure that we're not taking those opportunities away as we're surrounding the kids with multiple adults. The next one is balancing priorities. And as we give time to collaboration and more time to intervention, we are finding that in some ways that can pull time away from science and social studies learning. And we also know that when our teams collaborate, we want them to be focused on instruction, but there are times when they need to discuss operational issues. So that can be a challenge at time as well. We already talked about new curriculum. Everybody learned new curriculum together this year. So we got a new support model and we got new curriculum at the same time. And it was a lot to get everybody up to speed. But thankfully, the opportunity for the professional learning really helped us through that. So at this time, we will entertain any questions.
Questions, comments?
Thanks for that great summary of the way that the process works. And we've heard, the anecdotal from the variety of different schools that we've seen, but that was a really good overview. And it's exciting to look at the different kinds of things that are available to all students that perhaps weren't before. So that's really exciting. And to more students, as someone had mentioned. How is it working in terms of what kinds of results your students are demonstrating? So I know that, one of the things that we talked about a lot when we looked at this model is, okay, well, here's the data on how these students have done in LEAP and that kind of thing. And I know you're implementing new curriculum, so it's really challenging to look at that. Yeah. But perhaps looking at kindergarten, for example, that started the literacy curriculum last year, are you confident that we're able to support the individuals that were in LEAP and then the additional individuals in a way that is what you hope to see?
We are confident that we're able to support them. I think what we all have to remember is that this model is really based out of the school improvement process. So we really have to say that our new school improvement process is probably ultimately responsible for the growth and the success.
Right. Obviously.
And it's that whole thing of that array of efforts coming together and the multiple people coming together to collaborate that provides the success. So our data in terms of, we keep responding in terms of literacy with the Fontes and Pinnell data. Right. Our assessments have been administered for the second round, and our teachers have scanned their scores, and the data is available in the data warehouse, and we'll be able to report that with a larger picture on data.
One of the things that just for the board's knowledge, we're looking at, we talked about this at one point, and Assistant Superintendent Tim Warenga is working on preparing this later in the spring. I think May, we're going to target a date to provide a comprehensive overview of student achievement. So we always do something in November. We talk about ACT scores in school and previously ISAT scores. Now we want to look at some of our local assessments as well. We'll be able to present some of that data at that time.
And how will you be able to characterize? So I absolutely get it that we're in the process of preparing our data, but that in the meantime you feel confident that you are providing the supports. How are you able to really judge that you're able to expand? So sometimes it's easier to look at that other part of the spectrum where you say, okay, this is the growth we wanted to see, and we were able to demonstrate the same level of growth. But the growth that you want to see at the top might be a little bit harder because it's, they might have grown this much, or you know what I mean? It's sort of that top end of the spectrum. How are you monitoring how you're able to challenge students who might be, for example, we were talking a little bit before about that 3rd to 5th grade and that kind of thing. How are you able to monitor that?
I'll respond first, and then I'll ask everybody else to chime in. I think one of the biggest things, and I'm going to go back to our curriculum again. First of all, our curriculum actually provides opportunities for extension and growth. We have integrated tasks in both literacy and math, which really ask our students to apply knowledge across the different aspects in the discipline. So in literacy, between reading and writing and listening and speaking, in math throughout the different domains of knowledge within mathematics. So I think both with the curriculum and the resources provided, and then through the integrated tasks. And
I also think our PLC structure is really allowing for that as we look at data more specifically for student needs, and we look at then looking at that data, how do we plan our instruction based off of the curriculum, and we look at literacy and math, and we can target those extensions much better because of the data and those instructional conversations we're having as a team rather than in isolation.
So with all these shifts and all these changes, is there anybody that's worse off? Is like there's only a certain amount of, there's a finite amount.
Well, Mrs. Crotty, sincerely, it's our hope that there's never a child worse off, and that's another value to our PLC structure. By constantly analyzing data, by constantly knowing where our students are, we are hopefully making every attempt to catch any child that isn't thriving in this new structure.
I'm trying to think. No, I don't think so. I guess that's it. I don't mean to be less. I wish I could be more eloquent. No, I don't think this has been done
it's
to
set up
detriment
to support that and to
I jotted a note to
intentionally
myself. These are
avoid
not.
that.
This is kind of how would I put it in my own words? And what the approach was really this alignment of all of our efforts and all of the work together to support kids. And the idea for me was the idea of integration, not isolation. Whereas we had things happening here and here kind of in isolation of themselves. Whereas now we've looked at this as more of a real integrated effort, bringing things together, using data as the real driver, taking advantage at the elementary level of the PLC structure to allow teams of teachers to sit and talk about their kids and what they're doing and how they as a collaborative team, beyond just the grade level teachers, but instructional assistants, reading, the reading specialists, the LRC director, the adults in the building, how they can provide a system of support for the kids. So it's not just support is not a place. Support is something that happens as a result of our kids' needs, and I think that's what I like about this, and I think that's why it's the right thing.
It feels like if there's one part that doesn't support them, there's 6 others now that support them or catch them or raise them up and do all these. There's so many.
I think it allows for the creativity of, if there is a time when we identify a student, hey, I think we're missing something here. The structure of the professional learning community and the collaboration is to say, so how are we going to address it then? As opposed to just, oh, we don't have that.
From the Meadow Glen's presentation and your discussion, there's been a lot of emphasis on data and using data, which is it is an objective value. And I know this certainly comes from sort of a Facebook rant to some extent, but an objection from teachers to some extent has been that evaluation has been taken away as sort of a quality evaluation that looks at portfolio assessments, and I realize that is not the environment of our state or federal overlords. But in all of this data, and while it is not an objective evaluation, it is necessarily subjective, but can also, I know from experienced teachers, and we're lucky to have a lot of experienced teachers, intuition is the absorption of knowledge and experience to become subconscious, that they have an intuition about a child or an intuition that this child needs to be pushed in this direction. And you mentioned that there's a number of forms of assessment and evaluation that we do, and I would hope that one of those is that teacher.
Absolutely.
But how, I mean, in this, continuing conversation about data and using data, and I appreciate that science, that research-based model and the data-driven, have we continued to incorporate, how do we incorporate that teacher role in there?
I think one of the biggest things to think about in a balanced assessment system, if we go to one of the biggest researchers that we rely on is Rick Stiggins, the classroom on the ground teacher-made assessment is the most valuable out of all three layers of assessment. So you've got the teacher assessment, you have the benchmark level that the district makes, and then you've got that, the higher state standardized. The one that adds the most value and specifically to that conversation with the teachers is that formative, very informal assessment that classroom teacher does, and that's highly valued in this process. Does that answer?
Yes,
yeah.
that we continue to use
Absolutely.
that as a value.
Yes.
Yep.
Significant value. The knowledge and experience of our teachers and the knowledge of their students.
Right.
Which I know is great.
Too often we hear the word data and think of a number. And when we talk about
Right.
data about our students, it's the whole child. It's what the scores are, but also what the teacher observes and how the teacher interacts with the kids. So when we use that word data, it does include those things that you're speaking to.
I had just anecdotally, I know you wanted to say something. I was at BB school for something else. I was working in a Friday afternoon, and teachers were out, so I stopped by to see what my kids' former teachers and ran into my daughter's third grade teacher. And she asked about it. It was a lovely conversation, and she remembered something about my daughter that I had even forgotten. And this is after she's had, this was 8 years ago, so how many kids has she had in? And that knowledge that I know our teachers have of our kids is phenomenal, is spectacular, and that we need to sort of exploit that as much as possible.
All right, so thank you for your wonderful presentation, and we ended on the opportunities. So I guess my concern is still the 3-5 instructional assistant and the short amount of time that they have to cover 3 grades, and then and I know we talked about students being more independent at that age. But to be able to support them both in reading and math, what can we be doing? You have your opportunities here that I appreciate, but how can we even more? I love, you guys have done a great job, so thank you. I'm not criticizing at all. I just want to know, what can we do to take it to the next step? What can we ensure that the gifted instruction coordinator that is not part of that picture anymore is being handled within the instructional assistants and the differentiation, Right.
So I think the first thing you said, I think, is key, is what can we do to take it one step, right? One step further. I think that when I go back to the Meadow Glens presentation again, and they showed at 5th grade that co-teaching. So I think if we remember, first of all, that where this is embedded in our system of practice is that in our grades 3, 4, 5, we still have not only the classroom teacher, but we have multiple other teachers who can come in and play a role and provide support. We also do, and I think Mrs. Lynch referred to this too, we are programmatically different in that we do provide our PI program for our literacy, for our gifted, for students in the gifted program, and the honors math. So if we even look at how we could, even take this further in those grade levels, I think that it rests really within how we differentiate within the classroom. And we're always working on that. We talk about that all the time. But it's really employing different models that allow our kids to be self-directed. If you think about at that age level as they get older, how do we support them in becoming independent while the teacher is working with another group of students? So our challenge in taking it to the next step further is probably in working even more deeply in that classroom structure. I don't know that our next step further is to provide, any more assistance or support or adults to the mix. So, I don't know if anybody else wants to add to that.
And it's not systems, it's not to provide more systems and support,
Right.
but it's what kinds of system and support. How are we providing that teacher with the tools that they need as a team to differentiate, rather than thinking that an additional adult is always the answer. That's not always the best tool for that, to create that independent learner.
So if we think about how can we take it to another level, or what's another thing, and sorry, I'm not putting you on the spot, but I'll say something that I hope doesn't get me in trouble with you. But I've spent a little bit of time talking about the idea of, how do we blend learning? How do we look at the learning environment, blending really the integration of online tools and technology to really rethink how we're delivering instruction in the classroom. We're talking about transforming the learning environment. And I think, so when you talk about taking the next step, I think that's part of the next step. How do we really think about creating a blended type of a learning environment for our kids, so when they need to be stretched or when they need to experience that sense of disequilibrium? I love that. It's a new word for our self-directed strand, right? It's like, how do you get a child to experience a little bit of difficulty, build some resiliency and some persistence to continue to fight at it and at times to fail. And I think by rethinking really how do we transform the learning environment that we have, I think that's the next step for us.
Thank you.
So I have a question. Going back to, it was on NAPER, right, with the 3 tables and so forth, and it plays into what Dan's saying, what Donna commented on. So you have the 3 groups of children that are in there, and the one is like in the independent learning table and so forth. So obviously, when habits are instilled at a younger age, they're more likely to continue when you're encouraged and so forth. It sets a new mindset as kids go forward. So how are the children encouraged to be independent learners at this age, or are they offered it? Do they have to come up with them on themselves, or how do they get to that table?
Yeah, and I think that's one thing that. Go ahead. I think that's one thing we talked about. So we looked at the Meadow Glens presentation and then the pictures that we got. We're trying to show how instructional support is provided. But the one thing I think our principals reminded of, don't forget that there's there's lots of other minutes in the language arts block or in a math class where the teacher does have the whole class at some times, where the teacher may have one group and then you've got a whole bunch of students being independent. So, I think it happens through the instructional methodology. It actually happens through the tasks that they're given, and where they actually get a task that they're actually being guided through, and then they get a task where they actually have to demonstrate persistence and work through that. So I don't know if you can give some specific examples.
Well, and I also think it's how they plan that instruction. And when you look at that independent, not all of those students are working on the same independent task. So it is within that PLC structure that independent time is very intentionally planned, and the students go to that place. They know exactly what they're doing, whether they're using technology, whether they're engaged in a book, whether they're engaged in a math task. But it really is how they model that and how they've worked with that teacher one-on-one, and then how do they transition to that independent place.
And the other thing I want to add is all of our standards, especially our new math and literacy, are very clear about whether a student is supposed to to accomplish that with support or with independence. And that language is actually in the standards. So we know that most of the standards in the curriculum, they are to accomplish with independence by the end of the school year.
Do you find that the students are enjoying the independent activities? Have you gotten positive feedback on that from them, or?
They are, absolutely, especially when we walk around with some of our DLI classrooms and there's more technology within the classroom. They are engaged, they're on task. When there's not that technology, we've built their stamina to be independent within a math task, within a writing activity, like Mrs. Lynch was talking about. But the engagement with the new curriculum, it's more rigor, and I think they have risen to the occasion to show their self-directedness through those independent tasks.
Okay, thank you.
So I just want to thank you, because I know that, almost 2 years ago when I started, one of the questions I had was, how can we get to the point where it's almost like an IEP for each kid? I mean, obviously not all the paperwork and all the legality, but, where each kid has an individual, that's how we're going to close the gap. And I think what your differentiation what you're learning has differentiation learning and the support that you've put in place to do that, I think you're well on your way. I mean, that's exactly what you're doing. You're giving each kid, from what I'm hearing, an individual experience to be able to grow at their own rate. And kudos to you guys. Thank you.
Do you expect, I went back to when you were working on the part about the deepening the objectives. Do you expect to do any kind of professional learning about that? That independent end of the deepening of the curriculum or the pushing off point for the teachers? Just because I know that I think the independent learning is fantastic. The guidance toward it obviously is the key, and so I just wondered if you have anything kind of in your next set of courses, because these look more curriculum focused. Do you have any expectation of doing something like that?
We will continue our professional learning within the curriculum, if I'm understanding your question correctly. So correct me if I'm not going down the right path. But we definitely would do that. We do a lot of our professional learning based on feedback from principals, from our teachers, and then, of course, on student data. So those will be opportunities that we will definitely consider moving forward.
And how do you feel like both your teachers and your instructor, that was the one other question I had, is how are they doing in terms of adapting to all these new roles and responsibilities? So the teacher with all these responsibilities and the instructional assistant with a real different role, right?
They're amazing.
Yeah.
It's tough.
And they're busy.
It's hard,
tough.
and they're great.
Right. They've, from the beginning of the year, new curriculum brings questions and, in conversation, and they are risen to the occasion. They are implementing what you hear, students, how they converse in the classroom, they're implementing with integrity, and it's fantastic. They're doing a fantastic job.
Our teachers are lifelong learners too. So when I hear about the confusion that kids, what students go through, you only hope to do that as an adult, or you get boring. So anyhow, any other great discussion? Any other comments or questions? Thank you
Great
so
information.
much.
Thanks.
It was very important to the community. We saw a lot of them here, right at that table last year. So thank you for the follow-up. It's very, very, very worthwhile. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's so involved. I don't know what's next. 5-year forecast.
5-year financial forecast. Right. So in January, the CPIU for December, the 2014 CPIU was released and allowed us to adjust one of our biggest drivers and one of our largest assumptions in building our 5-year financial forecast. Brad Kaufman, our Chief School Business Official, is going to present an updated financial plan to the district. Just a reminder that this doesn't represent a budget; it's a forecast. Based on certain assumptions and drivers, if it didn't change, this is what it could look like. We won't get to that point, but this is where we're at right now. So I'll turn it over to Brad, and then we'll have conversation from there.
Whoops. All right. Thank you, Superintendent Bridges. Yes, so one more major big piece of data is in, and so we want to walk through the presentation. I will just say at the beginning, so if I forget somewhere, I won't, that, we went through this with finance advisors, got their input, and we're now coming back with that.
Yeah. A member of that committee's here.
Checking to see if I'm doing a good job.
I didn't get into that.
So we want to thank them for their service and their input also. So they have, big input on this as well. So as you know, what is what we call the FPP, or the 5-year financial planning program? It's just that. It's a planning program we use. What ultimately will become our budget, but is not the budget until it's fine-tuned and brought down to that point. So we're just in that final planning stage. It's based on, it helps us with our budget planning, tax scenarios, and all sorts of other things. What's in it? It's based on many years, 5 years of actual historical data, and then, of course, the working budget, what we're currently in, historical tax extensions, our actual staffing, and all those enrollments. All right, so this is our revenue. Okay, no surprise. Taxes make up 84% of our revenue, and that's one of the big drivers we saw tonight that we'll talk about, and that's the Consumer Price Index. So for the revenue assumptions, as far as property tax goes, we're assuming that really status quo as far as law goes. We have, as you know, two major tax types. There's the operating and then the non-capped or the debt service. And so under the operating levy, it's under PTEL, and consumer price index is a major driver for that. So sensitivity. So when you look at any kind of financial model, you really ask yourself, how does a variable affect the model? So you know how much worry, if you will, to put into it. Well, for us, the consumer price index, for every 1% change, it's plus or minus 2.5 million. New property, for every $1 million change, it's 56,000. And finally, for every change in the general state aid, for every proration, 70,000. This is the actual consumer price index. If you could see there, 2015 came in at 0.8. If you recall, we were estimating 0.7 or 0.9 off. Well, that's about, what, $1 million, right? A little over $1 million. So, well, it's a little over about 2 million, but I'll explain why it's $1 million to us right at this moment. So that was a big change. What really was bringing that down? The price of crude oil dropped substantially in the last quarter of the fiscal or the calendar year. As you know, we have 2.2. That's a historical, about 18-year average, and that's what we're projecting, and we'll talk about that going here too. New growth, we're seeing nothing new there, if you will, no pun intended, I guess. But 21 million, it's a consistent number. We will definitely be making that. All right, other assumptions pretty much staying the same. Other revenue pretty much remaining flat. State aid, it'll be curious. We have a new governor. We're hearing all sorts of talks. Senate Bill 16 now has been reintroduced as Senate Bill 1. Not much in it yet, but we may or may not see some changes kicking out here. Finally, federal revenue, we've not heard much on that. We expect that to be relatively flat. All right, looking at expenditures. As far as expenditures go, salaries and benefits are big drivers. 78%. Of our expenditures are salaries and benefits. Then, of course, we have our other. We have our bond. Well, it's not covered in this, but our part of our big budget would be bonds, and then just capital outlay and et cetera. Same thing under sensitivity analysis under expenditures. What do we need to worry about? For each 1% change in salaries is $1.5 million for us. Health and dental, for each 1%, it's $250,000. And then for each 1% shift in the TRS pension, $1.2 million. And we do have some shift built into these projections. What do we have for assumptions? Well, for salaries, we have our known contracts and then normal, what had been historical increases if there's no contract in place. Dental, 3 to 5%, which is very reasonable. Health and dental, we had 0% for this current year, you will know. And then finally, for expenditures ranging around 2%, if it's just a normal, otherwise like other under special ed tuition, since that is wage-based, we have 6% in there. And then we continue to have in a contingency of $1.3 million to make up for unexplained or unexpected items. Here for our staffing assumptions, based in the current model, we're still holding our staffing flat on the base model until we finish our final enrollment projections. No major changes at this point as far as legislative. One of the things we continue to watch, and we'll know here shortly, is we have quite a few people eligible to take the early retirement. We currently have 157 people in there. It could be more. And ultimately, in the long run, that will save the district money. All right, so going back to old scenario 5. Why old scenario 5? Old scenario 5 most closely mirrored where we kind of were with all the board discussions. And so really what was in there? Well, it had the, taking the full CPI on our tax levy. We had estimated 1.7% increase. We had no debt service abatement. And then we had built in there to pay off the 2008 bonds when they're callable in 2018. And you can see there the results. We had estimated fund balance of $138 million at the end of the 5-year projections. Cash estimated, I emphasize estimated cash before taxes because it's hard to say how our tax collection will run, but we're estimating that'd be about $30 million or 10%. And this represents the results there. The red lines of fund balance, the blue lines estimated tax or estimated cash before early taxes. Now, we ran a new scenario, which we had named our base model. This we presented to finance advisors. Only difference between this model and the old scenario 5 is simply the change in that CPI, right? So, to kind of help pull it all together, I did put in your packets this summary table, and I apologize, I probably should have paper here for you. But really, this really boils it down for us. So if you looked at the difference and you look on that chart, you'll see in fiscal year 16, there's $1 million difference. But we know when there's a 1% shift in our CPI, we know that is $2.25 million. So why only $1 million in fiscal year 16? Well, the reason why is because our tax levy split over 2 fiscal years. So anytime there's a shift in the CPI, 50% of the impact is felt immediately, 50% the following year. So if you look at this graph, you can see once that's fully implemented in 17, what are we down? $2 million because it was a 0.9. So we know our sensitivity analysis is working. So here it is. So what's the results? So on the base model, at the end of the 5 years, we'd be estimated to have a fund balance of $128 million, or cash reserves before tax of $27.5 million, or 9.45%, just below the district's goal of 10%. Now, we talked about the CPI with finance advisors in depth. The concern is the economy is beginning to lag a little more than we maybe thought. Crude oil, especially crude oil, holding down. So we kind of see inflation, if you will, staying a little lower. So we talked with finance advisors about maybe we need to look at a little less aggressive. Yes, the 17-year average for the CPI is 2.2, but it might take us a while to get back to there. So we're recommending that we'd look at more of a moderate. So we're currently known 0.8, then 1.5, 1.7, and then finally 0.2. So this is what we're calling new scenario 6. Now the other thing we looked at is we know as we're coming in with our enrollment projections, we haven't finished the long term, but we know short term where we're coming in on the fall, we know we're lower. So we were looking at reducing 6 full-time staff members in the picture. So we're looking at lowering our estimates to 1364. Now I might just quickly note that in 2015, you remember we were coming in there, we were projecting 1378 but for FTEs. But once we finally got fully staffed, we'd saved 8 more positions. Just because the projections say we might be at 1364, if that's not what's needed, will come in where is most prudent. So we'll make those final reductions as necessary. So based on that, what kind of results can we expect? And so let's just go to the graph. So here it is. So here's where we're at with our latest scenario. We're looking at approximately $122 million in fund balance at the end of the 5-year plan. Estimated cash before taxes, $22.3 million, or 7.71%. Lower than we would want, but we would still have ample time to make necessary adjustments. We would never get to this point, but this is where we're at currently with our 5-year financial forecast. With that, questions?
I think the last thing I would qualify by that is just with the scenario 6, it's our recommendation to the board that this be accepted as the base model now, the less aggressive CPI, and then also the reduction in the FTE based off of our enrollments.
I would agree. Does everybody think base model 6? This makes sense, yeah. Some guidance there. Oh, right, but you have 6, and then somebody's loves 4, and so loves
Yeah, we're
5.
still in the process of looking at our allocations for both K through 8 as well as high school, and then also kind of on the other end, we are seeing an increase in students requiring special education services. So we're kind of still looking at that too and determining what our final will be. We're confident with the 6 at this point, but like Brad said, that number will really reflect what our needs are.
March 1st.
For the early
March
retirements.
1st for the early requirement
That's,
notification.
yeah, just a few weeks away
Mhm.
is the last date for that sunset provision.
Correct.
Provision.
I had one other question. Okay. Do you have, I know you worked very hard to get our new investment strategy.
Mhm.
Do you have the investment income included in here as well? I know it's small, but it's better than it
Small.
was. Well, not
it's,
small.
It's huge, but you know.
It's
Yeah.
better than it was.
You know, we have factored in some of that increase, but you know,
I know.
we're not going to count it until it's in the hopper. So, but yes, we are factoring some of that in there.
Okay.
Thank you, Brad, for all of the adjustments and taking it to the Finance Committee. As we adjust for enrollment, and I noticed that you've put in the decrease in staffing for that, is that also going to affect our other expenditures? Should there be a percentage of that coming down as well then?
Well, I'm not sure, but when we reduce the staffing, then of course that proportionally reduces the benefits too, you know, anything related to that. But as far as, could we have less classrooms? I mean, 6 FTE less is probably not going to have a huge impact on like other items, for this size of magnitude, like supplies or materials. Now, as far as building allocations are based on enrollment. So those are already have been adjusted down based on where we see the fall enrollment. Now we're having a kind of a slight countering, and that is, they get also a little bit of extra money for free and reduced, and our free and reduced are up. So overall, our net site budgets are actually up a little, but they factor in all those things also.
Questions? Thank you so
Okay,
much, Brad.
thank you.
Thank you for the update. Always good to know where all your pieces are. And it's, as we said, they're projections, and this is an interesting process going into the budget cycle as well. I do not have a report this evening. Any Board of Education reports? No? I will entertain a motion for the consent agenda.
To accept the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Thank you very much. We have a motion and a second for the consent agenda. Ms. Bell, please.
Romberg,
Yes.
Yench,
Aye.
Fitzgerald,
Aye.
Prati,
Yes.
Wanke,
Yes.
Price,
Yes.
Fielden,
Yes.
Thank you. Motion carries. We have 3 things on our discussion without action list, our agenda. First one, draft 16-17 calendar. I don't think there's anything new, but we wanted to leave it on.
You want to just give the board an update on next steps and groups that have looked at it and will look at it before we come back?
Initial feedback from the administration at DLT last week. We will make a quick presentation to home and school on Wednesday and gather some feedback there. It will be posted on the website as it has been in the past, and with an email for people to send feedback. A couple people saw it in the last news.
Naperville Sun had it.
Naperville Sun
Yeah.
sent me an email, so
Right.
we'll gather that. I'll collect that feedback and take it to the administration the Tuesday before the next board meeting, and we'll come with a recommendation based on that feedback.
Perfect. Okay, great. So the community at large, I didn't see anything on the website about the two calendars yet. You're waiting for home and school,
Yeah,
and then you'll put them out there. Perfect. Get it. Okay, doke. Any other comments or questions on the draft calendar?
I have one so
Sure.
So then, just so I understand the process, so you're going to come back with, because we have two calendars out there, you're going to
Right.
come back and present one.
We did.
Okay.
A recommendation.
Come back with one, yes.
Great.
And will that be the same day we adopt it, or will you come back with the whole thing and then we adopt it the next time?
It would be the same day you adopt it unless the board chose not to at that time.
Unless somebody wasn't ready, but hopefully we've had enough time to think about it and hear from the community. Yes.
And I have a question. Kane, can you look at February on version 2? And can you just explain to me the week of February 20th? We have a half day for on the 17th, no school on Monday, 2 days, Tuesday and Wednesday, and then conferences Thursday and Friday. Were any other scenarios suggested with those days and mixing them around?
Not for those days. Those days, the 23rd.
Mr. Osborne, would you mind grabbing that microphone so we can?
Sorry.
The teacher voice is pretty good. You still have that.
It's just hard to
It's
hear it
still
on the
okay.
web.
Yeah.
Oh, the World Wide Web. That's the problem.
Those dates, the 23rd and 24th previously, remember, were in March, and we did
Yeah.
move those up. Certainly, we can, in looking at the feedback from the administration and when we go to cabinet, look to move some of that around so that gets broken up a little bit more. Traditionally, that half day has been before the President's Day weekend.
It just seems like a perfect time to go on vacation for a week, kind of thing,
But you would miss your parent-teacher conference
You would.
if you did that.
But as your kids get older, it's not quite the same. I mean, it changes over time.
That,
It's different
that,
than elementary
that
school.
particular conversation did come up at our calendar committee, which had a parent representative. The issue was then, like anything in the calendar, once you start moving it around, you face other potential problems in weeks
Of course.
as to what would be missed when.
It just seems, we talked about continuity of instruction and things like that,
Mhm.
whereas that doesn't happen that
Yeah,
time.
we did alleviate that problem in March when we moved the conferences to those dates. So as I said, it becomes a bit of a puzzle. One of the issues that we would look at, for instance, is how is attendance at parent-teacher conferences on those dates? Because up to now, that attendance has been very strong.
Right.
If we saw it ebb in those years, we would say maybe there's a problem we need to address there because parents are no longer attending at the rates that they were.
Yeah, and I think too, I love this disclaimer. It's not a disclaimer. Note regarding, the emergency days, I would say this applies to all the days. You need to be in school. There's plenty of time in this calendar, I think.
It's just chunky. That was just my. I
It
just wanted
exists
is.
on both
I think-
calendars too. That break exists on both
Yeah.
calendars.
I was
Both
just looking.
versions.
I was
It
just
happened to
right.
be, yeah.
I was just looking how it falls that year. I
Absolutely.
just picked V2.
Mhm.
Well, and V2 was the one that had the interest at our last meeting.
Mhm.
And was sort of bubbling up like a viable option. So thank you so much. Any other comments or questions? Thank you very much, Kane. There's always something to talk about on the calendar. Next agenda item, 8.02, high school course fees.
Okay, annually, the Board of Education sets course fees and approves course fees. And so our Assistant Superintendent for Secondary Education, Bob Ross, works with the two high schools to come bring those recommendations to you, and I'll let him present those to you now.
Thank you, Mr. Bridges. That's correct. Each year we come to the Board of Education, ask you to approve recommended course fees for the following school year. We actually usually do this a month later. We usually do it in March. We're doing it in February this year. The same time, we're doing another set of fees Mr. Coughlin will be talking about shortly. These course fees are, as they sound, attached to a specific course. If you don't take the course, you wouldn't be charged these fees. We have some proposed changes on the two spreadsheets, one for Naperville Central, one for Naperville North. The changes are in bold and italics. They include some increased fees and some decreased fees. The majority of the changes have to do with change in cost of materials, especially workbooks, especially in our world and classical languages departments. That's where I think you'll find most of the changes. There are some differences between our two high schools when you'll see in some of these course fees. However, these differences are the result of some differences in the selection of supplementary materials. But as we continue to align the curriculum, you will see, and I think you have seen, that these changes are being minimized, and it is a commitment of this building and the administration at both high schools to continue to bring those fees closer together as we move forward. I think we've done that in the last couple of years, and we intend to continue doing that. I'd be happy to try to answer any questions.
Under AP Gov, what is publisher student website? That was a new tag. That's on page 5.
Thank you.
And I happened to open up Central's because it was first, but it's on both of them actually. It's that because that's the most expensive fee for any class besides driver's ed.
Yes, let me check one other place.
AP Gov.
I have it here. I'm looking for some additional notes. I may have to.
Oh, I see. $70.
Yeah.
And if we can't get that information for you now, we can certainly have
Yeah,
it
that's
before
fine.
the board's asked to act on it.
Yeah,
Is
may
that
I,
like
may
a-
I check that for you before next month's
Okay.
meeting?
That'd be great. Sorry, I should have sent that to you.
No.
Previously, I didn't mean to put you on the spot. It's just that those classes don't necessarily translate at college for credit. And so that's an expensive by the time you pay for AP Gov.
Right, the semester-long one.
Yeah, so by the time you pay for the extra textbooks and $80 for the AP exam, and you go off to college.
You don't get credit
Well, there's
for it.
no
There's no
equivalent class in college. I mean, AP
Right.
Gov is essentially you take it because it's essentially the same as regular government, but you get that 5.0.
Exactly.
But you get AP credit for it in college.
If
But it
they-
doesn't,
if they have an equivalent class that they can offer to you.
Oh, okay,
So
okay.
there's really very few. I mean,
My kids
because
did,
it's
so I
essentially.
hear what
yeah.
you're saying. So your experience is they didn't get credit for it.
Right.
Okay, I see.
And so
Got it,
that's
got
a
it, got it.
lot of dollars spent, hoping on college credit that might not.
There is an answer
equate.
to that. I met with Mr.
Okay.
Helms and Mrs. McFadden, and I know we discussed
Okay,
this. I'll go
perfect.
back and find
Thank
out
you.
exactly what that was.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Sure.
So in the world and classical languages, it looks like we have some new online that goes across all of the languages. Is that correct?
Yes, I think what you'll find is something called Lingofolio,
Yes.
ranging in price between $2 and $3 depending on the course.
Right.
And I think you'll also find a pattern of, in some courses earlier on in the study of the language, the inclusion of a workbook and the removal of a workbook later in that language. So you might see a drop in price from the current year to next school year for the fee, a drop of $30 or $40, and that's from the removal of a workbook. But think about $2 to $3 depending on the course at Lingofolio.
So is that a new online resource that we're utilizing?
That's right. That's what it is. Yes.
Jackie.
In practice, we charge more for the consumer of our schools than for the passive taxpayer. Practice, I agree with it generally, but this is quite a bit more. Some of these classes are quite a bit more. I mean, more than twice an increase. Have we? And for parents who get, I appreciate that parents who are low income and struggling can get a break, but even then, this is asking for the user to pay quite a bit more, and it can become, especially if you have multiple kids, and we're talking about a significant increase. Right, and are parents going to be saying, don't take that AP Gov class because we're not going to get, but then you miss out. I mean, you do get a 5.0. If you get a good grade, it can boost your GPA, and, you look a little shinier to college applications. So have we investigated any alternatives to some of these things to
Yes.
bring these prices down, or?
Yes, and I agree completely. We want to be very careful, and honestly, this is the result of being very careful to not increase the fees substantially. We would not want any child or any family to make course decisions based on the price of the fee. We certainly want to avoid that. And you're right, Mrs. Price. We do have ways to make sure that those who cannot pay the fees, that we're able to help them, so that safeguard remains. But yes, anytime there's an increase, it is something to note. I think in the world classical languages, what you see is an inclusion of a workbook in some courses where we haven't had it before, and that's a result of some of the kinds of things we've been talking about tonight. how is it that we can help the kids to learn better? What is it that we need to do to improve? And in some cases, we've moved workbooks out of the course. In some cases, we've actually moved them in, and it is a consumable. It's a chunk of money. It does cost, and so that's where you'll see some of the increased fees. I wish they weren't there, but we are deciding that the course is going to work better, the students are going to learn better with those materials, and there is a fee.
I'd only add that we've identified as one of our commitments through our strategic plan to examine our fee structure and to really make recommendations that brings, I think the language in the actual commitment is a simplified fee structure too. So one that examines all of our costs, what we're charging for, so that we can come forward with the Board of Education with a recommendation on those fees.
I think another challenge is paying the fee in advance, and I don't know if we've looked at those sort of other market opportunities. And this is one of the things that my son has done in college. Is that he's found some resources where he's renting his books or online resources or buying them in alternative sites. I hope they're legal, but his price is. I mean, we've averaged $100 a semester for his textbooks. If our parents can find these things, I know, like, very nice, good job. If our parents could find these alternatives elsewhere, by paying the fee, we deny them that opportunity as well. Or have we looked at others? I mean, we might have some resourceful kids and parents out there that could find the workbook in another place, or.
Again, I just said we will be looking at how our fee structure, which would include course fees as well as our general and optional fees. I don't know what that'll look like yet, but it'll be legal, I'll tell you that.
College kids, I'll defend Nick. The college kids, they do Amazon. I mean, they do, as opposed to the bookstore. And guess what? In college, it's big savings, big savings. Another class, a course that I know seniors particularly love is the culinary arts and nutrition class, $45 to $60. Like, whoa! Now I understand if you have an interest, a lot of kids take that aren't going to pursue more work in culinary arts, and they're not buying their own knives, they're not buying their own things. It just gets expensive. I'm sure food costs are more. There's lots of justifications, but
Yeah, the justification in that case is the inclusion of a new serve-safe food handlers test that has not been a part of the course before. And moving forward, we'd like to make it a part of it, and there's a cost associated with that.
Okay, always a reason. Okay, any other comments or questions on? Oh, Susan.
Oh, no, I was good. I'm good.
She's waving at me.
I was going to ask. I know, like, U.S. News and World Report ranks the high schools based on how many AP tests are taken. Right. And then, all of a sudden it gets to be the end of the year, and we get a nice note from the counseling staff that says, time to pay for your AP test. So I think when you sign up for them and your kid's a freshman, you're like, wait, I already paid for, like, you're surprised you get kind of like a second bill. That, like, I thought the AP test was included when I signed up for the class the first time as a parent user. And I didn't realize it was separate and above kind of taking the class and the fees that you pay. It's an additional
totally
cost. And
right.
I know, we've never chased numbers. Our numbers speak for ourselves. We never chase those. But I was just curious if you've ever, and I know that not every kid that takes an AP class intends on taking the test. And sometimes that shakes out during the semester that, it is super challenging to them. And what was the word you used before? Making them uncomfortable.
Disequilibrium.
Yes. And, it's a good thing to experience, something that's hard for you. And, they take the class, but they have no intention of taking the final test. Have you looked at that at all to include the cost?
Include the cost of the test into the course up front? If they talked about that,
No, I don't believe we have. I suppose we could. I think one thing I'd want to make sure of a note I just took for myself is, are we communicating to families properly ahead of time?
It sounded a lot like a communication issue.
Are we doing that well in our course catalog? Are we saying another fee will come later if you want to take the test? I think we certainly owe that to families.
That's how I heard it too. We have to think about how we're communicating with those that are registering for that course. Okay.
Yeah, because there could be savvy parents who recognize that AP Gov, for example, is not going to be recognized. So why take the test? The reason you take the test is get the credit in college. So you get the 5. I sound very calculated.
Yeah, and a lot of kids take that class as a sophomore as their first entree to an AP class.
Yeah, but if I may, there are, I know my daughter took, I think it was French 5 or whatever AP French was, and she knew she wasn't going to get credit. She wanted the class.
Right.
She did not want the test.
Right.
So I would
I would not
be against
recommend, I would not put
bundling
PT in
that.
there either.
But it just seems like the
'Cause
communication
There's
needs to
absolutely
be the-
nothing wrong with taking the toughest class you can, and then not take an AP test. I know my personal experience. My school accepted 0 of my AP credits. So
Right.
if I would have known that earlier, I probably would have saved a lot of money, or my parents would have saved a lot of money. But
Any other comments or questions on high school fees? Thank you very much.
All right, and then along with that is our general and optional fees, and our Chief Financial Officer, Brad Kaufman, will share that with you.
Okay, loaded in board docs is the information. Really, we're not asking for any across-the-board changes, if you will, other than the expansion of some fees. We met with the activity directors at both high schools, and they had several new clubs that had been really operating for some time at same level of other ones and without a fee. And they felt to be equitable, they needed to have this fee so that they can provide the same level of support and without having to, be burdensome on the rest of the process. So we're recommending these new fees at the bottom. If there's any questions, I'd answer it at this time.
I have a question on this one too. I've been just full of questions today. Curious. The bus fees that the students pay once they are involved in activities, that's over and above the cost for just the activity.
Correct.
Okay.
So, and that also could be depending on the activity, but they could also have housing and, if they're overnight or whatever.
Okay.
Go ahead, Donna.
So the rationale for the new fees is just that there's because those are not new clubs.
No, they're not new. And what I guess one clarification I do want to make is when a club or activity has a state event, then we do provide the funding. So these clubs have been going to state events, and we've been providing that, but we've not been collecting their fee.
But for these clubs that provide a state, not all the students are allowed to, or if you're in the club, you don't necessarily participate in the state competition. So that's why I'm kind of trying to understand the rationale for, for instance, like the Science Olympiad, we have a new fee of $50, but I'm sure that not all of the students who are participating in Science Olympiad will participate in the state competition.
But the only reason isn't for state. What about that faculty advisor that's being paid as a stipend to be a part of it?
Okay.
That whole program, the way I look
There's
at it,
additional
there's all
things,
this
right.
programming that's involved, whether or not for a semester or a whole year, whether or not you go to the state.
And I'd say the same would be true for, like, say, our freshman athlete. They pay a participation fee. They're not going to go to state competition.
Right.
So.
Okay. I guess, you know what, it's not so much the new ones as it is and I asked the same question last year, the rationale as to which ones get on here and which ones don't. So like we have a lot, there's hundreds of clubs at the high schools that are, and there's a bunch of them that aren't on here. So I guess I just still don't understand. I see that we have new ones. You said something about a state competition, but I'm trying to understand the rationale for when they have a fee, when they don't have a fee, because they all have advisors too. A lot of them have advisors that aren't on here. So.
Right. Well, I mean, I could certainly ask our activity directors for a list of criterion, if that would help. I mean, I know we met as a committee, and this was the area that we felt like needed to be looked at. So.
And I think, Brad, if I recall, the conversation regarding the new ones that are listed here, no, they're not new clubs, but it's a new fee, because those clubs most resemble in practice some of the clubs that are listed above that have been charging a fee. There is some form of state competition.
The length of the season,
right.
different
or
things like
or a
that.
postseason. It may not be an IHSA, like Science Olympiad may not. It's not IHSA, but there's some form of a state organization or a national organization for which there may be expenses, like DECA, for example. Okay.
Okay, so then I guess my last question is that the ones that aren't on here are not on there for they've looked at those and there's a rationale. I guess I don't need the rationale. I just want to understand that there is a rationale for how you get listed on here and how you don't.
There, absolutely. And
Great.
that was part of the process this
Great.
year, was to say, okay, these need to be on.
Thank you.
Yes.
I have a specific and then a general. My specific is the Ann Reed preschool. Is that a monthly or an annual fee?
It's a monthly fee.
Yeah, okay, that's what I thought. And then, but the rest of these are annual fees, correct?
Correct.
Okay. My other question is more of a general question, and it's with regard to these fees and the other fees. How, I appreciate that we are working really hard to get our high schools together. How do we compare to other districts in terms of this, fee structure that I know you're looking at the fee structure, but how does that compare some of these kinds of similar types of fees?
Right. So, I mean, we try to look at that and try to
Yeah.
benchmark. First off, understand that fees vary tremendously across districts. But just for instance, so like benchmarking against some of our other fellow districts. So like our general school fee for kindergarten through 5th grade, that's at $68. Neighboring districts at $75.
Okay.
Okay. Our 9-12 grade fee, we're at $91. Our neighboring district's $105. Our driver's ed, we're at $250. Neighboring districts at $350. So generally speaking, as I've went through our fees and looked at our fees are generally lower than our surrounding districts.
They're
that we
very
benchmark against.
Very difficult in a simplistic way to be able to compare, though, because of how they charge for course fees and general and optional fees. So it's
very difficult to compare.
And a question I just asked about these fees, in the bold, you'll see not, they're not non-waivable fees or not waived. I wondered, if there's a student that they can't do a high school's athletic pass, can they still go to a football game? And I was assured by staff that, yes, they would be able to go to a football game. They're not missing out on the high school experience because they're not allowed to, there's not a general waiver, and they're not allowed, and they don't have a pass, so.
yeah, staff would work with our kids to ensure that they have opportunities.
I was sure they would, but I thought in case somebody saw this and thought, well, guess what? You don't get a yearbook, you don't get this, you don't get that. There are ways, lots of different ways for that, so. Any other comments or questions? On the fees? Okey doke. And schedule of events?
I'd highlight the Exemplary Business Partnership Breakfast coming up next week, as well as our next Board of Education meeting. And I would encourage everyone in our community to support the Naperville Education Foundation by attending Yucks for Youth. New date this year, February 28th, still at Wentz Hall, though. Always a fun event.
And RSVP, if you can, to Betty for the breakfast. We've only been asked that a number of times. Hopefully everybody's been able to do that. And then our next meeting for everyone on the World Wide Web, and including our couple of guests, is on Tuesday because of President's Day. So we'll be meeting on the 17th. Oh, wait, I'm all ahead of myself. What am I?
You're good?
No, that's good. Yeah,
Yep,
the
you're right.
17th, right. We had two. Those months are the same. Sounds good. We'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion is second to adjourn. All in favor? Any opposed? Thank you so much, everyone. See you on the 17th. January and February.